Hey, what is up guys, it is RB in Hardware with a brand new video. Today I want to show you guys my $900 budget gaming PC that anyone can build. This PC will run any game out there in both Full HD and 1440p, and so if you already got a 1080 or a 1440p gaming monitor, this PC is for you. In this video, I'm gonna show you guys the exact step-by-step method of how I'm putting this PC build together, showing you guys all the parts I'm using before booting the system up, testing out the gaming performance in some of the most popular games. Now, if you follow my steps throughout this video, you should be able to see these numbers in your favorite game on this PC. Now, I will be detailing most of these games in the benchmark section that we're gonna look at after we completed the PC build. Now, in case you're wondering about what parts I'm using, you can easily find all PC components linked up in the video description below. Now, before we get into the video, hey, my name is Robin, and on this channel we benchmark and build gaming PCs, both using the latest but also use PC parts to help you decide what PC parts to pick for your next gaming PC. And so if that is something you're interested in, smash the like button down below and hit that subscribe button and bell icon. So let's go ahead and start with the base of this build, the CPU, RAM and motherboard. For today's build, I ended up picking the Prime Plus from Asus, coming in at $119. Now, based on the B560 chipset, the Prime Plus is an affordable RTX motherboard that's got all the necessary features to make this a monster gaming PC. We find 4 DIMM slots, so you can upgrade to even more RAM later down the road if you want to. We also find 2 M.2 slots with PCIe Gen 4 support. We got plenty of USB ports with good VRM and decent heatsink. All of this for just around $120. Now we're going to pair the B560 chipset with Intel's latest Core i5. This is the 11400F, coming in at around $175. Now this is a 6-core CPU with hyper-threading. It's got a 2.6 GHz base clock and a boost clock that goes all the way to 4.4. Let's take a quick look at the gaming performance with the 11400. And here we can see that the $175 processor doesn't disappoint, making the 6-core Rocket Legs based CPU a great pick for today's budget PC build. Now, installing the processor in the socket is easy. First, you want to depress the lever on the side by pushing it down while you push it out. Taking a look at the socket, we see that there is a notch here and here. This lines up with 2 notches on the processor, so you simply want to turn the CPU so these notches lines up. And the CPU should fall in nicely. Lower the clamp and the CPU cover should pop off, and that tells us that the CPU is installed. Now guys, a cooler is included with the 11400F, which is good enough for stock settings, but for gaming it runs pretty hot, and honestly I think it's a great idea to spend a few extra dollars on an aftermarket cooler. The eSport 34 Duo from Arctic is a $50 heatsink with 2 fans. This one is able to cool even an 8-core CPU, and so for today's build it's an easy pick in my opinion. In order to install the cooler, we're gonna need this backplate and these 4 standoffs. Apply a bit of the included thermal paste and position the heatsink over the CPU so that the 4 standoffs align with the 4 outer screw holes on the cooler. Then carefully secure the cooler using the 4 included thumb screws. And that is it for now guys. We're going to wait a bit with the fans until we are done with the power supply installment and cable routing. Now to light up the system a bit, I am picking the highly popular 16GB Corsair Vengeance Pro RGB with a speed of 3200 MHz. We're gonna use the second and the fourth DIMM slot, so open up these latches and the RAM sticks can only go in one way. So let's go ahead and install our budget M.2 storage device. This one is from Kingston, it's got half a terabyte worth of space, and this is enough to fit quite a few games, and you can always add another NVMe drive later on, as the motherboard has support for 2 devices in total. We find one M.2 slot right here below the CPU socket. Gently slide the M.2 unit into the socket with a 45-degree angle with the little notches here lining up with the corresponding notch on the motherboard. Then take the little screw you got here, hold it down just like so, and screw it down until you feel resistance. Now we can go ahead and move the whole base of our build and install it in our case. And in this build I ended up picking the brand new 4000D from Corsair, coming in at $94. This is a fairly big mid-tower enclosure with plenty of expandability and features. It comes with 2 120 fans included. Now in order to get into the interior we need to undo these 2 thumb screws to remove the tempered glass side window. Now before we can install the motherboard, we first need to go ahead and install the I/O shield. This thing is located inside the motherboard box and it goes in from the back of the case with these circular audio ports you guys see here. These should be located at the bottom. Now we can move our whole assembly if you like and slide it into place, and we're gonna use the screws that comes provided by Corsair. With the motherboard installed before we move on to power supply and the graphics card, now is a good time to connect the chassis cables that takes care of the front audio and the power button. Let's start with USB 3, and this is what this cable looks like. This connector is located on the right side middle of the motherboard. Moving on to front audio, and this cable goes to the left side corner. Lastly, we have the front panel connectors, and you find these on the lower right side. These are for the front panel. It can be a bit tricky, but don't sweat it, just take your time. With that done, let's go ahead and install the power supply, and for today's build I chose the Cooler Master 600 watt unit with 80 plus efficiency certification. Now 600 watt is a bit overkill for this PC, and you can easily settle for the 550 watt variant, coming in at just $50. Now guys, make sure that the fan is facing downwards, then gently slide it into place and secure it. Braid the cables outside of the case so that they don't get stuffed in. We're gonna do a couple of cables and wiring before installing the graphics, and first up we got the 24-pin power for the motherboard, and this one goes to a connector on the mid-right side of the board. Next up we got the 8-pin power for our CPU, and this one goes all the way up to the top left side corner. Alright guys, so time to install our graphics, and for today's build we find an RTX 3060, this particular model coming from Gigabyte. Now based on the Ampere architecture, the 3060 offers an excellent 1440p gaming experience. 4K gaming is also playable to some extent, and as you can imagine 1080p will run insanely smooth even when maxed out settings. The 3060 also offers great ray tracing performance and supports DLSS, and these are 2 strong arguments to pick Team Green right now. And we're gonna look into the ray tracing performance a bit later after we completed the build. The prices, as you guys know, are upside down right now, but we hope that the situation gets better as we're getting closer to summer. Anyway, plug in the graphics card and take these two dual PCIe cables and plug it into our graphics card just like so. Now we can finish up with the CPU cooler. Connect the CPU fan cable to the CPU fan header on the motherboard. Attach each fan on either side of the heatsink and make sure that the arrows located on the fans are pointing towards the back of the case. And what is left to do is just to flip the case around, whack on the side panel, and we have officially completed our $900 gaming PC build. Let's fire up some games and let's look at what the PC performs like. Alright, so on your screen we are looking at the performance numbers that I gathered from today's build, and I ended up running 15 games in both 1080p and max settings, as well as 1440p max settings as well, and as can be seen, for the most part reaching 60 FPS or more is certainly what you can expect. Let's have a more in-depth look at some of the games tested, and first up we have Horizon Zero Dawn, starting at 1080p, where I went for the highest setting that the game offers, and here we are able to reach around 83 FPS. Moving on to 1440p, where I went for, once again, the highest preset, and here we managed to hit an average of 68 FPS. Next up we have Death Stranding, starting with 1080p. This is max settings with DLSS set to quality, and with these settings we are able to get around 134 FPS. Moving on to 1440p, we saw around 105 FPS on average, again using the highest setting in the game with DLSS turned on. Moving on to CSGO, once again starting with 1080p, here I'm going for competitive settings, and this results in about 320-ish FPS on average. Jumping to 1440p, using the same graphic settings, results in about 295 FPS. Doom Eternal is next guys, and here I'm opting for the Ultra Nightmare graphics preset. This is the highest setting that the game offers. Let's begin with 1080p, this results in about 178 FPS. At 1440p we saw 107 FPS, again using the Ultra Nightmare preset. Moving on to Overwatch, and as for the graphics settings, I'm picking a mix between high to ultra. This results in about 150 FPS. This is at 1080p. At 1440p we are seeing an average of 125 FPS. Valorant runs smooth with an average of 220 FPS, and looking at the settings I went for everything maxed out, and this is at 1080p. At 1440p we saw an average of around 200 FPS. Let's move on to Cyberpunk 2077. Let's first take a look at 1080p, where I went for high with ray tracing set to medium and DLSS set to performance. This results in 77 FPS on average, and mind you guys, this is with ray tracing turned on. Stepping up to 1440p, we're almost able to reach the magic 60 FPS mark at 55 FPS. Looking at the settings, you guys can see that I went for the exact settings as before. We're looking at high settings with ray tracing set to medium and DLSS set to performance. Now, as a bonus, here is a ray tracing comparison between AMD's latest GPUs stand against Nvidia's latest offerings, and as we can see, although AMD now offers ray tracing support on their GPUs, they are not delivering as smooth performance numbers as Team Green. Nvidia also supports DLSS, which is a super sampling technology, and this is something that AMD is currently lacking. Again guys, all PC components can be found down below. We also got some great news guys, because we now have an official Discord server up and running, and if you want to become a part of the community, ask questions either to me or any of the awesome people on the channel, you definitely want to go ahead and join the Discord server today. Link to the Discord can be found down below. Now watch either of these two videos and I will see you guys in the next video.